In this session, we're going to explore with Bob and Sandy how to build effective research partnerships and why to build effective research partnerships. And really, they're both probably the most qualified people we could get to talk about this, and that'll become evident to you as they begin to talk. So I'm going to invite you both up here. We don't have any PowerPoints for this presentation, you might be relieved to hear. So Sandy, if you could. So Sandy Carruthers, who's sitting immediately next to me, is the Director of Science, Monitoring and Knowledge in the Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources. And Sandy's been a great supporter of closer ties between the department and the university sector. And she's also been an important investor in activities which I think have set the standard for partnership activities which deliver mutual benefit. And Professor Bob Hill, on the end, is the Dean of the Faculty, or Executive Dean of the Faculty of Sciences, and also the Director of the Environment Institute at the University of Adelaide. And Bob's been a powerful advocate and a generous investor in research partnership activities, not just with Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources, but also with many other organisations around South Australia, Australia and the world. And the partnership between COST and Conservation International is just one of those important partnerships. The format of this session is going to be, I'm going to be asking a few questions of Bob and Sandy, and then we're going to throw it open to the audience to ask them questions. So be thinking about your questions as you're listening. So we'll get started, and the first question is, what makes a partnership as opposed to just a straight contractual relationship or commercial relationship? What's the difference between a partnership and just a simple interaction?
Okay, well, is that working? No? The lights are on, but no one's home. There we go. How about that?
Oh, that's better.
Yep, good. Now I've lost my train of thought completely. So let me, no, it's okay. I'm right. I'll recover, Paul. It's all right. Look, perhaps the best way to answer that is to just remind you what a university exists for. We're a research provider. We're not a research funder. And so we have a lot of research expertise within the University of Adelaide. We do occasionally invest in research, but primarily we're there to provide expertise. But much more fundamentally, we're a teaching organisation. And the reason we do research is to inform our teaching so that we produce graduates that are as relevant as possible to the workforce that's required. And it's really important to remember that that's our main driver. If the students disappear, we disappear. So first and foremost, we're a teaching institution, and our research is an important add-on to that. When it comes to contract research really for us is about applying our expertise in a particular case at a particular time, usually in return for funding, which supports that research. And that can be an important source of funds for us. Something that not all of our staff understand is that the only reason we do that is if it's a net income gainer as well as a net knowledge gainer. And some of my staff have particular trouble understanding that their salary counts as part of the costs. So it can become quite expensive to do contract research. Partnerships, on the other hand, are a very different beast, and I think a partnership develops over a long period of time with a partner who shares common goals, common ambitions, and a common purpose to a fairly strong degree, and you have a long-term relationship built up. Sometimes a partnership can come out of the blue with, and I think Conservation International is a little bit like that, although Leanne Pencoe has been working with them for a long time. But the critical thing about a really good partnership is that it's not necessarily about, one partner provides the money. More often than not, what you're really aiming towards is both partners providing significant expertise and resources, so you can then go to a third party to look for funding. That it's really about getting a much greater outcome than either of them can achieve on their own.
Yep, so that I would agree with Bob, what Bob just said, and I'd really add, good projects come and go, and that's what contract projects is really about. But partnerships are really about that longer term conversation, so you continue to talk in a partnership about what the opportunities are, and so that's what we do a lot with the University of Adelaide. It's about where are we both heading and where's our business the same, and what are the outcomes we can get if we think about the opportunity. So it's much more about talking about where you're going rather than individual things that are going on.
Okay, thanks. Now, that's lovely that partnerships are a mutual benefit, but you both have very different drivers in your organisations and different reward structures in your organisations. So when you're entering into these partnerships, how do you align those different drivers to get mutual benefit?
Look, okay, so when we start developing partnerships, I think the really critical issue it comes down to trust to begin with. You can't align anything unless the partners, two or more, are absolutely in concert and trust each other to be doing the right thing. Quite often, a lot of what we're trying to achieve out of a partnership is mutually beneficial. I mean, we usually both want the research done. It's usually research that it's about. And usually we want it done in the same way. I mean, we're looking for the same outputs. In a university world, you're looking for publications because we get rated by the Commonwealth on our performance, and so there are particular kinds of formal outputs that matter. We have some interest in income to do the research, but income's not our major driver in this space. And the critical part about a partnership that I think we've learnt over the years is that it's really important not to go into it either believing you're the dominant partner or believing that you're going to overachieve out of the partnership, that you're going to be the big winner out of the partnership. As soon as you start developing that mindset, almost certainly it will fail. And I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, but I think it's homing around it.
And I guess I'd just add from government's perspective, so government really relies on an evidence base to inform its policy. So Minister Hunter talked about that on Wednesday. But evidence is only one input to how policy gets developed. So there are also social and economic and cultural and political things that have to be considered as well. So evidence is really important, but it's one input. And the other thing for government's perspective is we have to make decisions regardless of whether the information is available. So we have to make the best available use of what we have, knowing that the information is imperfect. And so within that, we need to understand, well, what are the risks and what are the uncertainties within that. And so I think Martine's talk yesterday on vegetation offsets was a really good example of that, how you have policy developing without perfect information. And so that's where we can work with, I think, the value of having researchers who can think deeply about issues and go into the detail so that we can actually then understand, well, then how do we turn that into something that's relevant from a policy perspective. And the other thing that Sandy Pitcher talked about was public value. So public servants need to think about the public value of what we're doing, and so we're always thinking about the public good, and that's something that we I guess it's a different driver for us from the university sector, but often it ends up being something that's quite common. But it's we do have quite different drivers in terms of what we need to deliver when we do projects or partnerships.
Okay, thank you. Do you have some examples of projects or programs which you think demonstrate the exemplar of what a research partnership can be and deliver mutual benefits for both sides?
There's two, I think, that are well enough developed now that we can call them mature projects that have really delivered for us. The first was the first one that I got involved with in a large scale was the building of an ancient DNA lab in the Botanic Gardens on top of the herbarium where Michelle sits. It's probably about 12 years ago now. We approached Duna. We needed a site which was well away from any functioning molecular biology labs because of the risk of contamination, to build a world-class facility for the retrieval of DNA from very fragmentary material. Duna were just fantastic as a partner with that. We've got a site which we developed, was their space. They've charged us effectively no rent for that over the years. It's a genuine partnership because the herbarium has the potential to make significant use of that facility, and they have done sporadically, and I think will do so more in the future. The potential to retrieve DNA out of old herbarium specimens is a very important tool. So that's one where we have a person here, Alan Cooper, is a laureate fellow, which is the best research fellowship you can get in Australia. We needed that laboratory to attract Alan to Australia, and we did it. 12 years later, he's still here. The second one, which I think is a spectacular success, is arid recovery, where DUNA has really been the power player in the partnership from my perspective, but also BHP Billiton, which has funded that now for a very long time. And again, it's a very mature operation now and working extremely well as a partnership involving at least DUNA, University of Adelaide and BHP Billiton.
And there's probably three others that I can think of. So this conference as an example, so the RAIN network has been incredibly successful, and that's with Jenny starting, I think it was 4 years ago or five years ago. But this conference wouldn't have happened if the partners hadn't invested in that. And that network really is just the partners getting together and talking about how do we work better together and share. We have 5 joint appointments, 4 with the University of Adelaide and 1 with Flinders. And those joint appointments are, 4 of them are built into our business, and we rely on them very heavily for our critical science that informs our policy, and they bring all of their networks with them as part of their joint appointments. So they've been really successful, and the first one started 10 years ago, and Andy Lowe's been our longest joint appointment, and it's 10 years this May, and Michelle's just come up to 5, and they work incredibly well for us. And the third one is the Goyder Institute for Water, which I don't know if all of you know that much about it. Some of you will. But Goyder's been incredibly important from a government and a cabinet perspective. So what Goyder's actually done, it's a significant investment. So it was $50 million over the last 5 years. It employed 20 full-time FTE researchers out of that. But what it's actually done is government has really seen the value of that really good research and science that is directly informing policy decisions, and quite a lot of the research that's come out of Goyder has walked straight out of the Goyder report into government policy, and the Premier has used some of the Goyder's work in arguing around the Basin Plan and also Marine Park. So three really successful partnerships that we have.
Thanks, Sandy. So the world of universities and the world of environmental investment and programs is constantly changing, and it probably will constantly change. For you, what is changing, and how is it affecting your willingness and ability to engage in these sorts of partnerships?
Probably the biggest changer at the moment is the Commonwealth Government placing much more emphasis on impact and interaction with industry. And I think the reaction to that we're most likely to see, and one we would have gone to anyway, is that the next step in the partnership with DUNA in particular, and a really interesting challenge, is to try and get a much closer link between the research that we do and the policy that develops out of it. And we've had several discussions already previously and during the course of this conference about how we might achieve that. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's obviously the gold standard to aim towards. So I think if we could achieve that and demonstrate it quite comprehensively, not only would that be the socially responsible thing to do, but it would get us a gold star with the Commonwealth Government.
Yeah, I'm following on from that. One of our biggest, it's probably an internal challenge, not an external one. It's exactly that. So as the Commonwealth rolls out some of these really big research programs like TURN and the National Environmental Science Program and ARC and others, ARC linkages, our capacity now is less than it used to be, but we know as government we can add a lot of value to what researchers do and actually make that research, help define the research questions, stay involved in those projects, and then actually turn that into policy and management at the end. But I guess our challenge is to get that recognition from our research partners. So with NESP, we're a partner with the University of Queensland, and the feedback we get from them is they really value us being involved. But the challenge for us is to get them to actually build us into their programs, because our capacity now is less and less, and everyone in the room would. It's similar for everyone. So it's that sort of that challenge of how do you stay involved, but build each other in as you can.
Thank you. We've got more questions here, but I might pause and open it up to see if there's any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask Bob or Sandy. Yeah, a few up the back there.
Yeah, I'd like to direct my question to Bob. Bob, you placed great emphasis on the university as a teaching institution, and I guess that's a response to the drivers and the reward structures that Paul talks about. But it does seem to me there's this thing called public good that ought to drive a university, and the value for the university, it enhances its reputation. If you look at the CSRO, 20 or 30 years ago, it had a wonderful reputation because it actively worked for public good. So I just wonder about the emphasis there and whether you might push that too hard one way.
No, I think that's a fair comment, and I didn't mean to overshadow that. The comments I made about the link between research and teaching was very much in that public good area. It depends how you define public good, of course, but the research we do can be defined in a lot of ways. I mean, we are being pushed very hard at the moment, especially from the Commonwealth, to become far more applied in the research that we do. There's still a very strong need in universities to do blue skies research and to do research more generally for public good. It's a very fine balance for us, and the balance is going to be driven very much by funding into the future, and obviously the fight is on to make sure that we retain significant funding for fundamental research and that we don't find that we're driven entirely into an applied space. I'm not anti-applied research, but I'm certainly anti-driving us away from other forms of research, and also training students to be fundamental blue skies researchers.
Is there another question next to Alan? Yep. Simon?
This one's probably for Bob or Sandy. I'm looking at the Environment Institute banner down there, and I wanted to ask about, you mentioned the BHP linkage in arid recovery and thinking about industry involvement and private sector involvement, and just wondering about some reflections on how do we draw on effectively the intellectual capital in some of those big corporates like BHP or some of our consulting partners into some of these research partnerships as well in a pragmatic way.
Well, I can maybe give one example. I mean, we had, still have, a very large project operating in Spencer Gulf, and that's, I don't know if Bronwyn Galanders is here, but she's driving that particular project. That was set up back before the decision was made on Olympic Dam, because it was likely that Spencer Gulf was going to have very significant increase in usage. There was a chance there might have been a desalination plant there, and we decided to get involved and get in early to make sure that we could see all these multiple uses of the Gulf, how it could best be brought together to make sure the impact was minimised or potential environmental damage could be foreshadowed and something done about it. To their credit, several of the big industries invested in that project, and it is still going on, and there is still a need for it, but of course the landscape's changed enormously with BHP choosing not to develop Olympic Dam in the way they first planned. So it's not hard for us to get industries engaged in research when they can see a direct benefit for them, either in terms of their direct profit-making capacity, but also, in fairness, in terms of the impact they have on society and the environment. Responsible industries are keen to minimise that as much as they can, and they're prepared to invest in it. And we're very aware of that, and we certainly take advantage of it. It's our job as well to deliver that.
I was just going to add another one to that. So there's a Pollination Reserves project that the University of Adelaide came up with in conversation with PIRSA and JUNA, and that's now expanded to a project that's got 12 partners, and a lot of them are smaller industry partners around, so parent apple producers, canola producers, and people who rely on pollinators for their business really. And that's at the moment that's a $2 million shared sort of pool of funding, but it could end up being something like $4.5 million. And that's what all the partners getting together and saying there's something here, and on our own we'll get something really small, but if we actually all invest, and with the industry absolutely there saying yes, this is something we want, and that's a really good example of bringing everyone in. But it's around a problem that you need to solve, or an opportunity that's there for everyone.
Thanks, Sandy. I think there was a question right up the back.
Sandy, my question's probably most to you. Policy priorities can change very rapidly, and we see government deciding that, you know, now we're really interested in pollination, or we're really interested in water quality, or whatever it might be, and it can be difficult to try to commission research within a time frame and a format that's useful for government. How do you try to, as the partner in that sense, how do you influence the university to make sure that you're getting research that is both timely and useful to you?
Yeah. So it's hard when you don't have something structured. So Gord has probably been the best example where there was funding and an actual structure set up to be able to organise what is the policy questions that we have, and what are the ones that we need to answer, and then how do we organise our research partners to deliver that. So Gord has been a successful way of doing that. Otherwise, it still is opportunistic, because there aren't big amounts of funding that draw people together to, I guess, get everyone to have that conversation about what is it that we need. But I think Gord has actually given us some good ideas about how to do it anyway. So in the last 6 months, we've run some workshops on some of the different policy themes that we know we have needs around, and we'll use that information not just for Goiter, but for going to the universities and saying, here's an idea where we know we need some policy development. Is there something you can do? And I guess the bee pollination one is a good one, because it's a new idea on an old theme. So the theme is that biodiversity supports the environment. Actually is the baseline that supports really good agriculture and well-being and economic development for the state. So it's still the biodiversity as the underpinning of what happens, but bee pollination is a way of actually bringing in partners and giving them a different way to think about it, and I guess to be part of using biodiversity to support their business. So they're still the same policy themes. It's just they just expressed in a different way, I think.
Thank you, Sandy. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, one over here.
Yeah, the question to both of you, really. You have spoken mainly about university, DUNA, and industry. So in a way, or Goiter Institute, so in a way the big players. What's your view in terms of partnerships regarding small, not-for-profit setups, and you might want to call it NGOs, especially because there's a lot of enthusiasm out there, and there are certainly capabilities and people and knowledge in these type of organizations, and maybe even more importantly, that's a very good way of tapping into philanthropic into that area, because there definitely are sponsors out there who are prepared to really get into philanthropy to deal with some of the problems, and I guess for a partnership that would be quite a valuable issue.
No, that's quite right, and I was actually hoping we'd get to that point to be able to talk about that. We have some of our most successful partnerships here are with individuals, not even with small groups of people. Some people who want to support the university are happy to do so very much at arm's length. Others want to come in and be involved in what's going on, and we welcome that. We have some outstanding examples of individuals or families who've taken a very strong interest, and then things develop from that, which certainly works for us. And the same with NGOs. I mean, as long as it's a project which is compatible with our aims, and again works as a partnership so that it also suits what they're trying to achieve, we welcome that. We have a strong track record, I think, of developing projects in that space. So it's easy to talk about the really big successes in terms of large numbers of people, but in terms of time and effort, sometimes it's the smaller ones that deliver better outcomes.
I was just going to say, I don't see any problem with us doing that at all. So I know we consult or work with the NGO sector around policy development, but there's no reason that we couldn't do that on some of these projects where we have ideas around shared goals around ideas. So I don't see a problem with us doing that.
Now, this audience, I think we'll have to leave it there, I'm sorry. You can talk to Sandy and Bob after, I'm sure, over the morning tea break. This audience came along wanting to hear about some dating rules for research partnerships. So perhaps we'll finish off. Sandy, perhaps you could start with the dating rules for research partnerships. Sandy.
All right, so I had 3 that I thought of, and then the ones that I always keep front of mind. So, try to know what you want and be clear about your expectations, and be prepared to have a conversation about that. Some structure or some governance really helps. So particularly when you're starting off doing these kinds of things, so that gives you an ability to. It gives you a mechanism to have a conversation when things sometimes get a bit bumpy. So some structure is sometimes good. And the other one is just really easy. It's just to have respect. So have respect for what the other person brings, and because that's the whole point. Everyone brings something different. So I think that's fairly straightforward, but that's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, I agree. But maybe the one thing I'd add is when you're developing these, and especially when you're talking as one group amongst yourselves, which you obviously do, you don't have all discussions with the partner. Focus on the common good. Focus on what you're both going to get out of the partnership. I've been in too many discussions, especially earlier in my career, where the whole focus of the individual conversation was, what are we going to get from this? How can we get maximum benefit out of this partnership, without considering what the partner might get? As soon as you go down that track, it will fail. 50% of anything is good, 60% of nothing is nothing. If you try to aim for too much out of a partnership, it will fail and you get nothing. So as soon as you lose respect for the partner and for the project you're trying to undertake, and try and gain too much from it personally, is going to fail.
Thanks, Bob. That's it for us. I think we'll leave it there. Will you please join me in thanking Bob and Sandy for their presentations.